Howdy, fellas. And, well, I was going to introduce this as a new series called Concept Corner, but then I remembered that there is a fairly popular YouTuber who's already got a series called Concept Corner. So, looks like I'm shot out of luck on that idea. I'll think of a new name, eventually. Nevertheless, I still want to introduce something of a series, I suppose. I've said it once, I'll say it a million times, I have a ton of OCs. But part of my process with having a ton of OCs means that a lot of them are confined to my Google Docs and Notes app and have not even a singular crumb, not even a smidge, in terms of what they look like. I try to have as much of the story fleshed out as possible so the setting can influence how I go about the characters' designs, but sometimes I already know exactly what the character looks like. They're staring me in the face as we speak. And so I run into a bit of a hurdle. Because the story isn't finalized in a way I like, I feel like I don't have a good enough reason to draw any of the characters, especially if they're not the main characters. But now, I have my very own YouTube channel, and I can talk about whatever I want, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. In fact, planning out videos like this has actually helped me think of more ideas for characters, because as I'm writing down everything that I feel is important to share, it starts to get the cogs turning, things in the story start to make more sense, and things about the characters start to make more sense. Saying things out loud, even if it's to no one, just helps get my brain moving. And so, I want to share any and all of the miscellaneous characters that have been inhabiting my brain with you, and motivate myself to revisit these stories and give them a little more life. Even if this is the only time I draw them for a while, I think it's much better for me to have the idea out there, so whenever I do sit down with them again, I have an idea of how at least some of the characters look and act. That being said, nothing in these videos are 100% set in stone. I'm bound to revise, tweak, and retcon things the more I develop them, so everything you see here is just the working concepts that I have in mind, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce you to my superhero scientists, Mackenzie, Talullah, and Kincaid. Starting things off with Mackenzie because he's my favorite, hard eyes, and his design came to me the easiest. I've been in love with the concept and design I've had for him since day one, and oh boy, what a glorious day, he's finally here. A real quick rundown of the idea for these characters. These guys are a trio of scientists that fit into the category of secondary main characters. They hang out on the sidelines and help the actual main character of the story discover where his powers came from and how to use them. They'd be reoccurring, of course, but the story tragically doesn't center around them. Mackenzie would be the most tech-savvy of the trio, specializing in robotics and programming. But with his parents being chemists, he knows a fair bit about chemicals. And man, did they have a field day once his powers developed, because Mackenzie's blood, or saliva, or mucus, I don't remember what it was, is essentially made out of the same acid that's found in the stomach. What I've always had in mind is that the acid has gotten more, well, acidic over the years, hence why he's pretty sickly. His body has grown to tolerate it, but it's gotten so toxic so fast that he hasn't fully been able to keep up with it, so his body is forever adjusting as best as it can, and since he's immune, there will never be a day where the acid kills him. Probably. He's fine, it's fine, everything's fine. Even though he's immune to it, everybody else is not. Because duh. If he were to spit or bleed on anything, the acid would work the same as any other acid, but like 10 times worse. Think that fire guy from Creature Commanders. It's kind of got that kind of effect. So to combat this, his parents built him a custom gas mask that catches all the snot and dribble. Because it's made out of a thick material to hold all the acid, it also doubles as an oxygen mask, so he can, breathe. I haven't watched Creature Commanders yet, but basically think of the contraptions the fish girl, I think her name is Nina, was wearing in her backstory flashbacks. It's a similar concept. As for how Mac would use his powers, I think the acid can also act as a sort of nuclear energy source. I'm sure his parents discovered this first and used it sparingly as Mackenzie grew up, and then they relayed this information to him once he was older, and they allowed him to do whatever he pleased with such power. I may or may not have drawn out concepts for this. If I did, I'll put them on the screen. But since his mask collects all of the acid he's coughing up, I imagine it reroutes to a container attached to his tech backpack thing. And from there, I could see it connecting to a pair of guns that run exclusively on that collected acid. For For this concept to work, I do think he would need to be drooling a lot, especially when he's warm. Almost like his sweat glands are completely non-existent, so to cool down, he like drools, which is really fucking gross. But it makes the most sense to me to explain how he'd be collecting enough that he can use it in his arsenal. I'm sure he's also got backup containers, which is also really gross. With the way the acid affects him, I don't think he'd be doing too much of the fighting, but he's very capable when he needs to be. Because there's so much in his system, I've been thinking it makes it pretty hard for him to eat and get the nutrients he needs because everything he eats dissolves so fast that he's getting absolutely nothing from it. If anything, he just feels nauseous constantly. So he mainly eats things like granola bars and protein shakes, as well as taking vitamin pills or something similar to get the energy he needs without feeling like he's gonna puke. As for his design, I kept him pretty simple. I kept him in black because black retains more heat, but they're loose fitting, so he's not fighting for his life. He's going through enough as it is. The guy deserves to be a bit cozy. I also think it gives him a nice casual vibe compared to what you might imagine for a scientist character. They usually have a very business formal look to them, and that just doesn't jive well with Mac's personality. He loves what he does, but he'd much rather be in pajamas over anything fitted. I gave him combat boots because I love combat boots, and I just didn't think sneakers would go that well with his outfit. And I kept his lab coat very simple aside from the inside. I thought it would be fun to have their associated color line the inside of their lab coats and kind of look like they're glowing. I love giving characters in a group designated colors, so when I see them in the wild, I can point to them and go, OMG, that's them. But I'm the only one who knows who them is. I made him pale and his eyes are the same color as what I'd assume his acid would be. And in the future, I think I want to explore his hair more. Not change it because this platinum blonde fits him pretty well, but what if I were to give him black roots? Then it adds some more depth to his story and how his powers affect his body. How fun would that be? On to our girl boss. Talullah's backstory is super connected to Mackenzie's. I decided that he and Talullah would have the childhood friends to lovers trope, but that's mostly an off-screen thing, and you only really see it in how they interact and talk to each other. I think they would have befriended one another in late elementary school and stayed friends all the way into adulthood. Talullah was seen as the weird girl. She dressed weird, she's been wearing these big glasses since day one, and she has a weird passion for anything science related. She wasn't exactly an outcast. She had friends, but a lot of kids didn't want to stick around because they didn't want to hear 101 facts about the human body every single day. And then there's Mackenzie, doomed by default because he was the only kid in school with a weird contraption on his back and moved kinda slow. He also coughed a lot and couldn't eat with all the other kids during lunch or snack time. So, you know, prime target for being picked on. Mackenzie would purposely isolate himself from other kids because he knew how much he stood out, and he wanted to avoid hearing people half-heartedly whisper while they make fun of him, and that only gave kids more of a reason to pick on him. Not Talullah though. Talullah thought he was the coolest kid ever, and went out of her way to interact with him whenever she could. I think it would get to a point where one day she straight up brought a pair of walkie-talkies to school so they could talk to each other during lunch. One of the original ideas I had was that Talullah would be the one to come from old money, and when she was an adult, she'd use that money to build her very own laboratory. But now that idea has shifted to Mackenzie since his parents are already scientists. What happens is he and Talullah move into his parents' second house, refurbish it, and expand the small laboratory that they had, and this is where the trio would get up to most of their antics. Personality-wise, she's a little similar to Dr. Olivia Octavius from Into the Spider-Verse. More so, they have a similar vibe about them. She's quirky and very clearly passionate about her craft, while also having the capacity to become very intimidating on a dime. Talullah's pretty hot-headed. She can get laser focused on a very specific goal, and will try over and over and over again until she gets the outcome that she wants. But she can also get very frustrated very easily, and is susceptible to losing her mind and taking it out on whoever happens to be closest, usually by yelling at them. As a kid, she was totally the type to hit her parents while she was throwing a tantrum. She's grown out of the hitting, but every now and then she will stomp her feet. She does have a superpower, but it may change in the future because I'm not sure how happy I am with it. Essentially, she was born part cyborg. Specifically, the idea that came to mind was when she bends her arm a certain way, there's just a gun. in her elbow, just hiding right in there. Maybe her bones are made out of guns. I'm thinking of changing that a bit to where it's her palms instead, kind of like Iron Man, because in my mind, she's always been able to fly. Like I said, a lot of working concepts, I'm really just spitballing here. All I know is Talullah's powers aren't supposed to be anything too crazy. They're mostly just meant to help her get around faster, so she can use the weapons that she made herself. I knew I wanted her to have this mad scientist look about her, especially in her expression and her glasses. The first idea I ever had for her was her introduction. You'd follow Mackenzie and our third character, Kincaid, as they're walking up to meet with Talullah, and the first ever shot of her would be with her in shadow, sitting in the car and turning to the two. You don't see her eyes, all you see are these bright colored glasses doing the anime shing thing, and her smiling. And of course, because I'm me, she's got a tooth gap because you can't tell me what to do. Her outfit stumped me a little, and I'll be honest, I don't know that I'm fully happy with it. I've alternated between two ideas as I've thought about the story, one where she's wearing this big long skirt, and another where she's wearing shorts. I like the silhouette the skirt gives her, but I think I could get the same outcome if it was just her lab coat. If anything, I think that would make the lab coat stand out more. I'll have to explore that. Talullah likes colors and patterns and a number of accessories, but the accessory of note is the charms on her glasses. In the sketches, I was going to make it so that she was just wearing the turtleneck, but I felt like that didn't make her pop enough. So I gave her a big button-down shirt she could wear on top of it. Looking at it now, I don't think the pinstripes are enough for her. Like, they don't give the wow that I'm looking for. I'll have to see if I can find and or make a very specific pattern that fits her better. Maybe something with zigzags. That, or I'll just add even more patterns on her. We'll see what happens. I almost feel like she'd really like floral. Her colors did give me the most trouble. I know I wanted everyone to have their own dominant color, and pink was the first option I had for her because I always imagined her glasses being pink, but I'm almost tempted to make her color palette overall lean more into yellow. Again, something to explore later. Last but most certainly not least is my boy Kincaid, and he's the one with the most story behind him. He's an ex-scientist who played a part in the overall story I've had in mind for these guys since day one. Once upon a time in this world of superheroes, only 5% of the entire population would develop a superpower. Pretty much everyone has the gene, but no one is guaranteed to get powers. It's not like a puberty thing. Enter this group of people without powers who feared that there was a chance all of the super people would randomly become evil and try and take over the world. So they came together with a number of scientists to see if they could discover a serum or something similar that would make it possible for everyone to have a superpower. Very original story, I know. As the trope goes, this group is frankly immoral in like every single way when it comes to how they go about their experiments. They have connections that make it disgustingly easy for them to use orphaned, and sometimes even their own, children to experiment on with varying results. What I had in mind for Kincaid was that he was aware of what's happening. He is one of the scientists after all, but he wasn't aware of any children dying because of these experiments. He sucks, of course, but I do think he bonded with plenty of the kids who were under his care. They either got powers, or they didn't. Log it down and send them off so they could be adopted. Like everyone part of this operation, he was fully aware that what they were doing wasn't legal. He'd never deny it, but as far as he knew, no one ever got hurt. The serum's effects would wear off in a few days, maybe a week, so while there's a chance the kids may be sick, they wouldn't die, right? Right? Well, no, not right. Because kids have been dying. The people higher up in the operation have just been hiding it from everyone. Some kids have been getting adopted, yes, but others have straight up died and it's been kept secret. Until now, that is. I haven't fully written out how many kids there were at the time or who this specific kid is, but I imagine each pair of scientists was in charge of 3 to 4 kids at a time. Kincaid had a favorite that he saw a lot of himself in, and while they were testing serum number 6,969, that favorite kid dies. For some reason, my brain said their head blows up, but that's fucking horrifying. Oh my god. Distraught, Kincaid finally comes to his senses that, yeah, this is a pretty fucked up thing to be doing to kids. And realizing this isn't the first time a kid has died from these serums only sent him spiraling further. So, with the help of his at-the-time partner, like science partner, not like queer partner, They essentially cause a prison break and help as many kids escape as possible. This is where the actual main character of the story would come from, by the way. One of the few toddlers who were able to escape and got to grow up pretending to be somewhat normal. Also, Kincaid isn't his real name. It's not his first name and it's not his last name. It's the name he adopted after escaping because corrupt organizations gonna be corrupt. A portion of people were government officials, ones without powers, of course. So you could say Kincaid is a wanted criminal, seeing he very nearly caused the entire program and those working in it to be exposed. He changed his name and probably dyed his hair in order to go into hiding. While typing this, it gave me an idea for his eyes. I love me a pair of big, beautiful brown eyes, but maybe his eyes were a very specific color that could only be given to him from the superpower gene. And part of the reason why his eyes are always closed is so that he doesn't draw that kind of attention to himself. I'll have to think about it more. Kincaid doesn't have superpowers, but you wouldn't know that because his weapon is literally permanently implanted into his back. I figure, because of his guilt, he'd do the same thing to himself that he'd done to many kids over the years, forcing his body to obtain some sort of superpower. He implants these robotic leg type things into his back. I can't think of how to explain what they look like or what a visual comparison would be, so hopefully I put the visuals on the screen. They're basically like metal spider legs, kinda, that help him crawl and stab and all that good stuff. There are also implants in his arms, and they respond to the way he moves his hands. Like if he clenches his fists, the legs will move in a similar way. Not much to say about his outfit, it is pretty simple. His color palette is the one I'm the happiest with because it looks just like him. Similar to Talullah, I wanted him to have this oddly menacing look about him despite being one of the good guys, only this time it connects to his dark and mysterious backstory. Him always having his eyes closed, then almost always smiling makes it seem like he's up to no good and he's going to betray the heroes. But no, he's just putting up a front because he is technically in hiding. I wanted him to look the most professional in the way he dresses, seeing he did work as a proper scientist for a good while. My man has a degree. He's Dr. real name redacted, Kincaid. I honestly just thought the goggles would look cool on him, and I was right, because they do. I'll have to get around to designing a proper hero-esque outfit for him and Talullah, because I think they'd be able to move better with less layers. I already mentioned that Talullah and Mackenzie are childhood friends to lovers, but to explore that further, I think it'd be something of an unspoken thing. The two have never outright said they're a couple, but over the years they've just become a couple. Because of Mackenzie's powers, I've had this silly thing in mind that Talullah is saving her first kiss for him, because one of their many side projects is developing something that would make Mackenzie's powers less life-threatening, or at least make it more bearable so Mackenzie doesn't have to feel like he's on the verge of death all the time. Kincaid and Mackenzie get along the best, mainly because Mackenzie is more grounded than Talullah. His experiments and inventions and hypotheses are all things that are practical, while Talullah is all over the place doing whatever happens to be on her mind at the moment. She's the one doing experiments to see if you can pinpoint where fear in the brain comes from, or testing to see if you can power a robot with a deer's heart. Because of this, Talullah and Kincaid bump heads a ton, especially once the actual main character, Rory, gets involved. They'd start bickering a whole lot more because Talullah loses interest in saving the children, because as far as she can see, there's only one kid, and he's doing just fine. Why take his powers away from him when they're not causing him any pain? But since Kincaid knows the truth, he's very driven to do test after test on Rory in order to replicate the data he had as a scientist and breaking it down to reverse its effects. Since Kincaid is very set on this goal, I feel like he merely tolerates Talullah in her antics. He knows she and Mackenzie are a package deal. If he falls out of favor with one of them, he loses both of them. And the lab they have has quite literally everything he needs to reach his goal. He can't risk losing access to it, so he plays nice. He's respectful, he tries not to get in Talullah's way, and keeps the bickering with her to a minimum. She has her moments, but a little more often than not, he could do without her input. Around this point, we bump into what's kept me from really writing this story out any further. See, when I was originally writing the story, it was very much a coming-of-age underdog deal, where our main character Rory goes about becoming a superhero by proving himself to those around him, while also learning that the job isn't all that it's chalked up to be. Like every superhero story is doing nowadays, he'd see that some heroes are corrupt and only care about themselves and just want to make money no matter how many casualties occur. there'd be a side plot where our hero gets exposed for being a horrible person and using civilians to fuel his power. And Rory really struggles with this because maybe this specific hero was Rory's idol. Finding out that he has no regard for those less fortunate crushes him. Then enter this trio of scientists who tell Rory he was never meant to have powers. He's a government experiment, and now they have to figure out a way to stop them. And then there'd be another plot happening separately with an entirely different cast of characters that also have an adopted science experiment kid. But this time, they were a group of mercenaries. And there would be this huge plot point where this group has to go to a government facility that was recently blown up, and they find the kid that blew the place up and have to confront their morals because she's an unstable experiment. But then I started to explore an idea with my OKKOOC and how I might be able to repurpose him in this story. His name is Hive Mind, and he has the power to control people's minds as long as they can hear his voice. Sort of like a siren, just he doesn't eat you. Probably. I thought, what if Hive Mind had a big villain role in the story? What if he's the reason why heroes have been going missing? And when Rory enters the scene, this has been going on for months, and he's part of an effort to defeat Hive Mind and recover the missing heroes. And oh my god, what if he's the one who started the effort to create a serum to give everyone superpowers syndrome? Is that you? What I'm saying is, the story was getting very crowded, and I had just so many ideas on top of ideas, and I had to face the reality that I might have to kill my darlings in order to make things make sense. The story was already big enough with it taking place in such a big city filled to the brim with different heroes, and jumping from character to character like that just wasn't working out in a way that I liked. I'm sure I could make it work, but my brain just doesn't have the capacity to make things flow in a satisfying way right now, so I had to step away to keep from burning myself out. However, that hasn't stopped me from thinking about them from time to time. I'd love to eventually come back to this universe and properly explore things further, but for now, these silly little scientists and their adopted lab rat son is all I really care about. So that is where I think I will leave this video. If you drew alongside me, it looks intergalactic, planetary, intergalactic, and I am so very proud of you. Let me know what you think of the art I made in this video down in the comments below. If you'd like to see more art from me without having to scrub through a video, feel free to follow me on these platforms on the screen. I do have my commissions open on my Ko-fi page. I've been doing a lot of rambling on Tumblr, so if that's your thing, feel free to follow me there. And as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.